The action in this movie, I would say, is much better in this one. I mean, the action in Spider-Man 1 was really good and well executed, but this one, Sam Raimi really takes it up another notch, or even two, of how exciting the action is in this movie. Spider-Man chasing the two thugs, driving off in the car down the street, swinging in between the truck and the rig, which made for a great trailer moment, and every time I watch it, I'm like, oh, love that shot. The bank heist sequence where Otto is throwing the bags of coins at Spider-Man, and Spider-Man throws one back with the "here's your change" line. Fighting on the sides of the building. Aunt May's trying to hang on to her umbrella on the ledge. And the train scene, which, oh my god, the train scene. I love it. I love it. I love that train sequence. It is so great. Arguably the greatest action sequence ever put to a superhero movie. Everything about this fight is just perfection. The little pose that Spider-Man gives when the fight's about to start, flying through the walkway bridge, fighting on the side of the train, Doc Ock throwing him into the train, and Spider-Man swinging on the bar, going to the outside and webbing onto the train as he's about to land on the side. That attention to detail is so good. And it's the same thing in the bank heist scene where he's about to do a slingshot move trying to save Aunt May, and you see this cart that's standing right behind Spider-Man and he's pushing back against it. And these two sequences, the bank heist and the train scene, these actually get extended in the 2.1 edition, which I have to admit, I'm not a big fan of that edition. Some scenes add some unnecessary dialogue, and usually I'm not a big fan of extended cuts anyway. Some of the stuff that we see in the bank heist scene and the train fight sequence, those are the only things from the extended cut that I would have kept personally, because I think it makes it a lot more entertaining. And in fact, Spider-Man and Doc Ock in the bank heist scene, they land in this one building and they're punching each other, and Spider-Man gets thrown side to side against the wall, and they are thrown out the window, and this woman's like, ah! And in fact, after Spider-Man swings back up from the street, and Doc Ock kind of slams him against the side of the train, and Spider-Man gets hit by a train, but he keeps swinging anyway, and you could argue that, yeah, that's just instant death. But still, it's fun. What the heck? Those are the only things I wish they would have kept from the extended cut, because, like I said, makes it more entertaining. And some of my favorite scenes in this whole movie. Peter's confession to Aunt May after she blames herself for Uncle Ben dying. Peter finally has the courage to take responsibility for Uncle Ben's death. And as I said with the first movie, despite initially going to the wrestling match to impress Mary Jane, he never intended for any of this stuff to happen. It's just an innocent choice that he made at the time. But he's very aware of what he did, especially when he said, "I wanted to buy a car to impress Mary Jane." I've also heard that the editor chose for the most part to not cut away from Tobey Maguire's performance because it was too good. And I completely agree. I've seen Tobey Maguire's other movies, including Brothers and Pawn Sacrifice and Seabiscuit, to name a few. This scene here is some of the best acting that he has ever done. You could see the guilt in his face, and you could hear the pain in his voice. He sells the hell out of it. Even if you're not a big fan of these movies, it's hard to not feel some kind of an emotional attachment to this character. And as I said with Rosemary Harris, her acting is on point too. Peter tries to go for some reconciliation, but she doesn't give it to him. She's appalled, and she just leaves him at the table. Whoa. Although, it's a nitpick, I'm not really a big fan of the cut though, the transition to Doc Ock's tentacles going vroom, vroom. It's just a little bit jarring. Nitpicking aside, Peter's confession to Aunt May is a really great scene. And also the scene where he rescues the girl from the burning building, which I think is a fantastic sequence. And you know, if him losing his powers contrives a great moment like this, I don't really see that as a big problem. I think it's perfectly excusable. And that's something I strongly disagree with Chris Stuckman on, because he argued in his review that this scene feels very tacked on and too much like a retread of the first movie, where Spider-Man fights the Goblin in the burning building, and it's not really needed and you could delete the entire thing. No. Yes, you could look at it as a repeat from the first movie, but that's a repeat for a reason, because it's the polar opposite of the scene from the first movie, because he had his powers and was able to save the baby with almost complete ease. But in this one, he doesn't have his powers, and it's like, oh no, he's not Spider-Man, he's Peter Parker, but he's still a good person, and he can only turn the other cheek one too many times after seeing the guy get mugged in the alleyway by those two thugs, and he can't do anything about it, and you could see the guilt on his face. This one, he's finally decided, enough's enough. I gotta save somebody in there, because he still has that drive inside of him that wants to help other people. And this scene admittedly makes me tear up, because it always hurts me to see a little kid in some really grave danger, even in a movie. When he finds the kid in the closet and he carries her out and she's terrified, it's like, oh man. And I always like it when she pulls him up from the ledge that he's hanging on. It's really cute. And when he finally is able to save her by coming out of the building, it's like, yeah! And speaking of that, this guy here, who tells Peter that there's a kid stuck on the second floor, that's the same guy from the first movie who said, "You mess with Spidey, you mess with New York!" But also, this scene is completely necessary for Peter to realize that even as Peter Parker, he can't really truly be happy, because even though he saves the girl from the fire, he overhears one of the firefighters say that somebody got trapped on the fourth floor and didn't get out. It's not as impactful as Uncle Ben's death was, but it's still impactful to the point where he realizes that he still failed to save somebody because he wasn't Spider-Man. So yeah, I completely disagree with Chris Stuckman right there, because you need this scene for him to realize being Spider-Man is more important than his own personal needs as Peter Parker, and that people still need a hero out there to save them. And then there's Aunt May's speech to Peter about heroism, and it's able to help Peter finally realize that being Spider-Man, as I said, is much more than Uncle Ben's death. It's because of the hope and inspiration that he gives to the people of New York City. Especially when he sees the young boy, Henry Jackson, their neighbor, feeling sad over the possibility that Spider-Man's not coming back. The music in this scene by Danny Elfman always makes me cry in the right way. I sound like a sap saying that, but I can't help it. I love that speech. Not only does it apply to superheroes, it can apply to everyday life, where you see just a normal person saving somebody from a fire or from a car accident. Whatever the case is, it's applicable all across the board. And another great scene, which is by far my favorite scene in this whole movie, is when Spider-Man saves the train from crashing into the river, and the people on the train see him without his mask on. After Doc Ock causes the train to go out of control, Spider-Man stays behind to try to stop it. At first he tries stopping it with his foot, doesn't work, shoots 2 webs to the side, doesn't work, but then finally shoots as many webs as he can onto the walls of the buildings and holds on and pulls really as hard as he can. It's like, "Aah!" And I gotta address this. People, of course, have made the joke that he looks like he's taking a dump when he's doing this, but look, it's a heavy train, okay? It weighs I don't know how many pounds. You pull something that heavy and you put a normal looking person like Peter Parker in that position, of course his face is gonna look weird. In fact, I'd probably look like that too if I were doing the same. It gives me goosebumps every time I watch it, because you see his struggle to stop the train and how fast it's going, and the music. It's like, oh my god, stop the train! And once he finally stops it, he is just so blown out physically that he almost collapses over the front of the train, but the passengers stop him and carry him inside. Oh my god, this I keep saying it. The music in this scene, when the hands go out and stop him, it's beautiful. I sound like an idiot, but it's beautiful. I love it. And they lay him down on the floor and they're just stunned by the fact that he looks like a normal guy. Particularly when this guy says, he's just a kid. He's no older than my son. And I know some people might have a problem with him being unmasked to everybody on the train. In fact, my Nana kind of a similar response, like, oh my god, his identity's exposed. Well, first of all, it's not like Peter Parker's a public figure. If this were Batman, and Batman was unmasked and you saw it was Bruce Wayne, then yeah, it would be a problem. But it's not like the passengers are saying, ooh, it's Peter Parker. They don't know who this guy is. He's just some random kid from New York to them. And they're just stunned by the fact that Spider-Man's a normal guy who went out of his way to nearly give his life to save them. And therefore he's able to prove to naysayers that he's a good person. And I also know that people have problems with the fact that he takes his mask off a lot, but in this movie I think it's okay because it allows us to see what he's feeling at certain moments, like when he loses his powers. And it's important for the people on the train to see him without his mask on, because like I said, he's just a normal guy. And Peter wakes up, he realizes that he doesn't have his mask on, he's feeling a little exposed, but then these 2 little boys come out and give him his mask back, and they're like, don't worry, we won't tell nobody. And the passengers kind of nod in agreement, as if this little pact has been made between the passengers. I mean, they're not going to tell anybody they saw his face, but the fact that he saved the train, that's obviously going to get around, and it's a continuation from the first movie of Spider-Man growing with the people, which would eventually lead him to being a beloved hero in the 3rd movie. By the way, I think it's really cool and actually kind of cute that those 2 boys that give Spider-Man the mask, those are Tobey's brothers, believe it or not. And yeah, you look at the eyes, particularly on the younger one, they look like Maguires. The Maguire family. And then, of course, there's the raindrops keep falling on my head montage. I love that scene. It is so hilarious. At first I thought it was kind of dumb when I first saw it, but I still liked it at the time. Now, as an adult, I love it. Yes, it is cheesy, but it's also a scene where it helps illustrate that Peter's life is now getting better now that he's given up his life as Spider-Man. From taking a bite of the hot dog and walking away and the freeze frame shot, oh my god. And now let's talk about the climax and the ending. Otto takes Spider-Man to Harry's apartment. Harry gives Otto the tritium. Harry unmasks Spider-Man, and he finds out that Peter is Spider-Man. Now, when I saw that moment in the trailers, let's see who's behind the mask. At first I thought it was going to be some kind of a fake-out kind of moment, but the fact that they went for it, where he finds out Peter's secret, it's like, oh my god. And you could argue that maybe Peter could have said something like, I didn't kill your father, now tell me where Otto is. Maybe so. Not to get too into Spider-Man 3, there's no excuse for him not telling it by the third movie. But at the same time, I understand that Peter's like, look, Harry, we don't have time to talk about this. There's bigger things going on here. And Harry has the decency to tell Peter where Otto's hiding. Although I do wonder, how did he know where he was hiding? I don't know. In the end, it doesn't really matter. And so then it cuts to Otto's hideout, with Otto preparing his experiment. And there's a little funny moment right here that Mary Jane says, Hey, I'm talking to you! Doc Ock and Spider-Man fight it out in the warehouse. Spider-Man unplugs the experiment, tries to shut it down, but to no avail since it keeps gaining momentum. And then Peter reveals his identity to Otto in order to talk to him because of their previously established teacher-student friendship, and takes but what Otto taught him and what Aunt May taught him, and uses it to wake him up and make him see that what he's doing is wrong. And once Otto finally realizes what he's done, he decides that the only way to stop it is to drown it in the river. And then Mary Jane sees Peter Parker unmasked. And again, when I first saw this, I gasped. Just like she did. It's like this. It's another moment where it's like, oh, finally. Thank you, now he doesn't have to hide it anymore. And Peter saves Mary Jane as the warehouse collapses into the river. And they have a moment together when they're hanging out on the web that Spider-Man made. And Mary Jane's like, I think I always knew all this time who you really were. And people are probably like, well, then why didn't she say anything? Well, maybe she was thinking that, if he wants to tell me, he can tell me himself. I don't think I need to confront him. And then Peter says, well, you know why we can't be together. I can't let you take that risk. And now, when I watch this movie, whenever Peter says,
I will always be Spider-Man.
Just like Heisenberg, I say,
You're goddamn right.
As much as I like Tom Holland, Tobey Maguire will always be Spider-Man. Nobody will convince me otherwise. And so he lets her go and swings off into the sunset, so to speak. Harry discovers the Goblin Lair, as I stated earlier. And then Mary Jane leaves John at the altar of their wedding. And yeah, that is a really, really harsh thing for Mary Jane to do. On the other hand, you could see in the scene that she has with John, where they're kissing each other upside down, that she doesn't really feel the same about him as she does with Peter. And in a way, John is kind of like the voice of reason for Mary Jane, when she says, you are adorable, and he goes, it's the uniform. Yeah, that's really what it is. John Jameson, as a character in this movie, yeah, he's fine. But like I said, he's the voice of reason for Mary Jane. And the look on his face at the altar when he receives the letter, it's like, oh man. I think they maybe could have cut that scene out. That way it wouldn't feel as hurtful on his part. That maybe if we just saw Mary Jane show up at Peter's doorstep anyway, or maybe just show her running away from the wedding to be with Peter, I think that would have been a little bit better. But on the other hand, you wouldn't get this funny line from Jonah.
Call Deborah.
The caterer.
Tell her not to open the caviar.
And the look on his wife's face, like she's saying, your son's just been humiliated at his wedding and you're worried about caviar? And just like with the first movie, I love this whole ending. It's a perfect way to wrap it all up. And like I said earlier, with Peter finally being able to be rewarded for having a life with Mary Jane, once he finally has that out in the open, she can finally be honest with herself and stay true to her feelings. Because she says to him, it's wrong that we should only be half alive, half of ourselves. Which also plays into the idea of the dual identity crisis that Peter had going on in his head throughout this whole movie. And Mary Jane in a similar fashion had her own, since she was trying to move on from Peter, but at the same time couldn't help but still feel a desire to be with him. And despite the fact that Peter tells her, you shouldn't be here, I like how she makes the decision for herself. I know you're trying to protect me, I know you think we can't be together, but that's not your decision to make, it's mine. And she knows that there's going to be risks, but as she says, I want to face them with you. And isn't it about time somebody saved your life? And finally, Peter is rewarded. He finally can have something good in his life. But then they hear police sirens, she gives her approval, go get him, Tiger. And he swings off into the sunset to stop the next crime that's happening. And as much as I don't like this web-swinging sequence as much as the first one, how would you outdo the first one in that regard? It's still great though, and the music in that scene is still excellent. And then it ends on Mary Jane with a sort of ambiguous look on her face. It's like, well, she made this choice, but did she make the right choice? It's like she knows that this isn't going to be easy. despite some of my nitpicks and my one problem with the movie with the hospital scene, overall, I love this movie. It's my favorite of all time next to the first movie, and every time I watch it, it gets better and better and better. So guys, thank you for watching my review of Spider-Man 2. I apologize once again for getting this up a little bit late, but I had a harder time talking about this one more so than I did with the first movie. But I really appreciate you guys staying patient about it. So let me know what you think of Spider-Man 2 down below in the comments. Love it, like it, think it's alright, or do you hate it? Which, whatever the case may be, comment below and tell me your thoughts, and stay tuned for my review of Spider-Man 3. That should be an interesting conversation. We'll see how that goes. Nevertheless, comment below and tell me what your thoughts are on this movie, and I'll see you guys next time.